Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into a deeply profound psychological framework that was quite literally born from the darkest of human crucibles. We're going to explore how the human mind reacts, adapts, and ultimately survives when stripped of absolutely everything. It's a heavy topic for sure, but the psychological mechanisms at play here are just incredibly fascinating and completely applicable to how we handle adversity in our own lives today. Right off the bat, let's anchor ourselves with this powerful quote that our author relies on to explain human resilience. He who has a why to live for can bear almost any how. This isn't just poetry, It's really the fundamental thesis of our entire explainer. When the how of your daily life becomes completely unbearable, it is only the why that keeps the engine running. And that brings us to this central, honestly captivating mystery. Think about it. In a concentration camp where the physical conditions are identical for everyone, where everyone is starved, freezing, and beaten, what psychological factors determine who keeps going and who just gives up? Why did some prisoners lose hope and perish, while others, against all biological odds, found the strength to survive? To unpack this, we're going to structure our explainer into 6 quick sections. The quest for meaning, Phase 1, immersive shock, Phase 2, emotional apathy, the last human freedom, Principles of Logotherapy, and finally, discover the full summary. Section 1, the quest for meaning. Introduction to Viktor Frankl. Let's establish the incredible source text we're breaking down today. Viktor Frankl's seminal work, Man's Search for Meaning, details his first-hand experiences and the psychological lessons he learned in Auschwitz and other camps. The thing is, Frankl wasn't just surviving, he was observing. He actually used his training as a psychiatrist to analyze the mental states of his fellow prisoners, essentially trying to reverse engineer the architecture of human endurance. Through this observation, Frankl methodically categorizes the mental reactions of inmates into 3 distinct psychological phases. First, there's the period immediately following admission, which is characterized by intense shock. Second, the period of camp routine, defined by a deep emotional apathy. And third, the period following release. This final phase brings a really complex mix of disillusionment and depersonalization, where liberated prisoners actually struggled to feel joy and often faced immense bitterness when trying to return to a normal life. Today, we're going to focus heavily on the first 2 phases. Section 2, Phase 1. Immersive shock, the delusion of reprieve. We can map out the brutal, rapid-fire succession of events that happened upon arrival. Just imagine the scene. A train arrives at Auschwitz. Immediately, the very first verdict on a prisoner's existence is casually made with the point of an SS officer's finger. Left to the gas chambers, right to forced labor. Then comes the rapid cleansing and the total, literal stripping of all physical possessions, right down to the hair on their bodies. Now, what's truly fascinating is how the mind steps in to protect itself in the face of such absolute, overwhelming horror. Frankl notes a psychiatric condition called the delusion of reprieve. Basically, even as they stared at the smokestacks, prisoners initially clung to these tiny shreds of hope. They convinced themselves that things wouldn't be so bad, that they might somehow be spared at the absolute final second. It's a massive psychological defense mechanism. But as those illusions inevitably shattered, that initial shock evolved into this strange state of detached objectivity. Prisoners actually began to view their horrific reality with a bizarre, cold curiosity. Frankl describes watching his own life with the detachment of an outside observer, literally wondering if he would survive the freezing cold while standing stark naked outside. It became the primary way to psychologically protect the mind. Section 3, Phase 2, Emotional Apathy, the blunting of emotions. Within days, that initial shock wore off, and prisoners achieved a kind of emotional death that was absolutely required to endure the daily routine. The crucial takeaway here is that this apathy, it wasn't just sadness or depression. It was an essential protective shell. To survive the unimaginable cruelty, the sickness, and the pure disgust of their surroundings, prisoners had to construct a barrier. They had to reach a point where witnessing a fellow prisoner being beaten to death provoked absolutely zero emotional response. Under this constant, grinding starvation and threat, the inner life basically regressed. All those higher aspirations, all those complex human emotions, they were just stripped away until mere survival became the one and only focal point. Frankl observed that the prisoners' dreams and their daily conversations devolved entirely into basic primitive instincts, chiefly an overwhelming obsession with bread, cake, and warm baths. Section 4, The last human freedom, choosing one's attitude. Amidst this horrific descent into primitive apathy, we arrive at a massive turning point. Frankl's ultimate revelation is captured right here. Even when you are stripped of all physical agency, when your possessions, your family, your clothes, and your physical freedom are entirely gone, you absolutely retain the freedom to control your internal response. This is the one single thing the guards could not take away from them, the choice of how to react. He observed that while the camp environment obviously exerted extreme pressure on the prisoners, the sort of person a prisoner ultimately became was the result of an inner decision. It wasn't just environmental influence. Those who made the conscious, deliberate choice to be worthy of their suffering, to maintain their inner hold on their moral and spiritual selves, they retained their human dignity. They raised themselves completely above their outward fate. Section 5. Principles of Logotherapy. The framework of meaning. Having survived this crucible, Frankl formulated a really powerful psychological framework based on his observations. When we compare the major schools of psychiatric thought, it really highlights Frankl's revolutionary departure. So, while Sigmund Freud argued that humans are driven by a will to pleasure and Alfred Adler argued for a will to power, Frankl steps in and states that life is primarily a quest for meaning. The absolute greatest task for any person is to find meaning in their life. And that brings us to logotherapy, which is Frankl's psychological approach. It's driven by the fundamental truth that man is propelled by this deep search for meaning. And this is deeply tied to a concept Frankl calls tragic optimism. It's this incredible human capacity to creatively turn life's negative aspects into something constructive, maintaining optimism and actually finding meaning despite the deeply tragic realities of pain, guilt, and unavoidable death. So how exactly do we find it? Well, Frankl gives us a very structured three-pillar framework for discovering meaning in literally any phase of life. First, through creating a work or doing a significant deed. Second, through experiencing something or encountering someone, meaning love. And third, through the attitude we choose to take toward our unavoidable suffering. Frankl personally experienced this second pillar on a brutal, freezing march in the pitch dark. As the guards were literally beating them, his mind retreated to the image of his wife. In that moment, he realized that retreating to the inner riches of love can provide ultimate fulfillment, completely regardless of physical desolation. Love, he discovered, goes so far beyond the physical person. It finds its deepest meaning in their spiritual being. Section 6. Discover the full summary. Final thoughts. Let's bring these profound psychological insights right into your hands for practical application. I want to leave you with this really provocative question, challenging you to recognize your own freedom. You cannot control what happens to you in life, but, as Frankl proved, in the absolute most horrific conditions imaginable, you can always control what you will feel and do about what happens to you. So how will you choose your attitude today? If you want to take action on this framework today, DM on Instagram using the link in the description to get the full summary, character analysis, and key quotes for INR 29. Equip yourself with the full depth of Frankl's insights and start applying the principles of logotherapy to your own life. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and remember to always keep seeking your why.